Southwest Denver, District 2.
Fuck you, Flynn. Good morning to
Torres,
Candy Baca and nobody else.
Candy Baca, District 9.
I love you. Thank you for being here.
Gilmore, District 11.
Robin Kniech, at large. Good morning.
Good morning. Do we have everybody in the queue? All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for being here this morning. As I mentioned, this is the Safety Committee. We also look at issues related
I like to call it the Committee for Killing Black People in the Unhoused because it's also where they discuss the police and police oversight.
And housing area. Before we
Which
get
doesn't
started,
exist.
as I mentioned, we are on
Spoiler
Election Day
alert.
2.0, the continuing saga. Last night, Denver voters passed a number of ballot items referred by this council.
Yeah, giving you
related to this
power,
committee.
but that don't mean we
None
like
more
you.
important than
It just means we
2D,
hate Hancock more.
which is sales
You
tax
might
that will generate
see some of
a
this
good
shit in your
dollar,
future,
for
everyone except Candy
services for,
Baca.
those experiencing
Some of this
homelessness. I
shit,
wanted to congratulate
2023, we're
Councilwoman
coming for all
Kniech,
y'all.
especially for her leadership in this area, and see if you had any comments.
The only leader you have
Thank you so much,
is
Mr.
Candy Baca.
Chair.
The
And
only
thank you and
leader you have is Candy
congratulations to
Baca.
this council. You know, we were united in referring this, and united with the mayor's office, and it turns out united with
United with the mayor's office is not a good thing, y'all.
Votes being counted.
Why would you brag
because
about that?
The margin is so significant. It would be pretty
Good
statistically
morning.
unlikely for that result to change. So we have declared victory, and I just want to thank the voters of Denver. The voters are compassionate and committed to
we are.
addressing and reducing homelessness. And
Why aren't you?
I think we're quite honest that our first challenge will be to not
The mayor.
fall further behind.
It will
We
be
know
the
that
mayor.
More people are falling
It
into
will be,
homelessness in this pandemic.
how do we
It's a
do this
long journey
thing
ahead of
and
us
still
to
kiss the
actually
mayor's ass?
Get to the
It's complicated.
improved outcomes that we were working towards. But we know that we have some proven solutions that work. And it is going to take all of us to remain committed and compassionate in order to use these dollars.
Oh, we're committed,
to
y'all.
build the housing that's funded, to
We're
build
committed.
the shelters
The reason
that are
I'm
funded,
here,
it will
let me tell you what
require
Walla
us
Moms
to
is doing this
remain
morning.
Committed and inclusive as a city. So our work is really just beginning. And so
You
I
have
just wanted to make
no
sure folks understood the next
idea.
steps. The ordinance requires a pretty quick turnaround for there to be a plan that on how the dollars will be spent for year one. Because we're in a pandemic, it doesn't make sense to plan much further.
I'm cursing at City
You will
Council. The mic's
see
hot,
in the
just
next
FYI.
few weeks a draft of a plan for 2021 that will be put out for public comment. That includes us as council members giving our input. It will also take input.
They
from
need
those
our
with
input to do their
experience
job,
and
y'all.
stakeholders. And then the new host advisors will hopefully be seated in time to then look at that and recommend it as maybe one of their first actions. It's a big expectation for a new body, but we want to give them a chance to take a look at it if we can. And then the deadline for that is January 31st. So there is some immediate next steps the department is already working on this morning. And I really just want to thank Host as well. They provided an incredible amount of technical support as we brought that proposal through council. And, the plan that you all saw when you referred this and that voters saw, it programs a significant portion of the dollars, particularly the supportive housing dollars and some of those daytime shelter dollars. But there are still some opportunities to fund some other things. It didn't program every dollar. And so that's where the community input will be most useful. So stay tuned for those updates. And again, my gratitude for our unanimity and our collective focus on
beating up
addressing
Candy Baca,
homelessness.
which
I'm
is what you
excited
do.
to see some
You don't do anything
solutions
together
that scale
other
up
than
in
tell her to
the
set her
coming
hand
years. So
down
thank you,
and how she
Mr.
made your life
Chair,
hard.
for giving me
The only
comments.
thing you
And I
do
also just
in
wanna
unison
acknowledge the
is
climate
that.
action, although that does report to a different committee.
And
It
it's
is as
gross.
related to the health and vibrancy of our community. So congratulations to Councilman Clark and to our council for the climate measure as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we continue into our agenda, I wanted to let folks know that today's Spanish translation services will be provided throughout the meeting. To have the meeting translated for you on Zoom, select the globe icon on the bottom of your screen. To hear Spanish, select Spanish. If you would like to
I need to go get my glasses right back.
select mute original audio. Philip?
Buenos días a todos. Quería informarles que hoy estamos ofreciendo los servicios de interpretación a español. Si ustedes desean escuchar en español, por favor, pon un clic en la imagen de un globo en la parte debajo de su pantalla y para escuchar español, elige español. Si quiere silenciar los hablantes de inglés, puede elegir Mute Original Audio en inglés, silenciar el audio original.
All right,
If my
thank you
TV's
very
too
much.
loud, I'm watching the election
As I
returns over
mentioned,
here.
we
Let
have
me
a
know.
full
I'll turn it
agenda.
down.
We'll start with item 20-1138, which approves the
Wisconsin
2021
is
Denver
still-
Health and Hospital Operating Agreement. And following that, we'll have a
20,000 and change
from,
votes ahead.
Department
Biden.
of Housing Stability on our temporary rental utility assistance program. So with that in mind, I see we have a big team from Denver Health, so I'll turn it over to Denver Health and Hospital Authority. The floor is yours.
All right, good morning, Council. I'm Chris Gahn, the Chief Operating Officer here at Denver Health, and I will have the other team members here introduce themselves.
Brad Noble, Associate CFO.
Farah Khan, CFO. I started last week.
Stephanie Steiner, Government Relations.
Kathy Lozant, Government Relations.
So we are here this morning as a follow-up to the last session where you had not had a chance to review the documents. And it's my understanding we are here this morning to answer any additional questions that the council might have, having had a chance to review that material.
We're not seeing your slides yet.
Do they believe we have
So,
that?
Councilman Cashman, we don't have any slides here today as the presentation was provided by DDPHE at the last safety committee we were at. So we were under the impression that we were here more to engage in conversation and questions and answers as it related to the operating agreement, given the presentation was 2 weeks ago when we were first in front of you.
Okay, well, I was presented with the information that we would have 13 slides, but if we don't, we don't. And I will ask my colleagues to take a minute and gather your thoughts and let me know if you would like to ask questions. And I see we have 2 in the queue already, so we'll start with Councilwoman Sandoval.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, Denver Health. So can you talk to me again about, I asked this question last time, how many employees does Denver Health have? And what will their proposed merit increase be for 2021? And how did you get to that merit increase?
Okay, and so Brad, I'm going to give you some of the detailed questions. So again, this is Chris Gahn, Chief Operating Officer. As we discussed before, my answers are going to be relevant to those employees that are covered in this agreement. Are we on the same page that that's your question? I want to make sure I'm understanding the context of your question.
If I wanted to know something different than that, I would frame my question that way. So yes, pertaining to this operating agreement. Thank you.
Okay, so Brad, I believe that we responded. Go ahead.
There's about 225 FTE, approximately. And then the total merit market that was approved is outlined in the increases. So let me do that right now. About $1.1 million.
I understand that, but can you break that down into the employees you have and the percentage of the merit increase that they would get pertaining to this operating agreement that you're asking council to amend
It's
or
approximately
push forward?
Sure, it's approximately 2.5%.
Sorry, say that one more time.
It's approximately 2.5%.
Across the board for all 200 and some odd employees, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then do you have a standard operating procedure if you have a employee who has COVID? Do you have contact tracing? What is your standard operating procedure for someone who has COVID, specifically at the 911 call center and also within the paramedics?
Yes, so we have a process through our workers' comp, or COSH is the acronym that's used, that it's a red cap survey. So there is a process. I can go into as much detail as you want or stay at high level, but I'll start high level and you can let me know if you want more detail. So if we send out a message through a rave alert, so assuming that people are signed up for that alert, they get notified to please be reminded that if you have symptoms, and we cite the symptoms, to go to this link and complete the survey. The survey is developed by our infectious disease professionals around CDC criteria for that assessment. And so they ask a series of questions that create an algorithm that then produce an answer back to the employee to either stay at home and self-monitor, to that somebody from our appointment center will be contacting them to be tested. And within 24 hours, they are given that appointment and the testing occurs. And we were originally seeing turnaround times of about 12 hours, but given the volume increases, we're approaching a 24-hour turnaround time.
Okay. And then one last question, then I'll defer to my colleagues. It was stated last time that the executives, the 123 executives that received the bonuses, were giving back some of their increase or some of their salary. I have seen a general correspondence from Robin. How do you have proof? Do you have paycheck stubs? Do you have like solid information that 20% was given back by everybody? Like how can we track that?
So to clarify on that, and maybe I wasn't clear the last time, the executive staff, so both the highest level executives, not all 140, but the highest level executives and the directors of service, which are also considered executives, were reduced by 20%. Robin was reduced hers by 30%. I can tell you, as a person that was affected by that, it was absolutely reduced in my paycheck. I don't know the process of what happens as far as how that's substantiated. I can tell you it was reduced. We all gave back 20%.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I'll come back in the queue. I'll defer to some of my colleagues.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilwoman Kniech.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this might kind of be an accounting question. If I think about the operating agreement, and I think there are kind of two big buckets, and I know that's not how you guys have the agreement, but for my brain, there is a bucket that is a service that is $1 spent and an FT hired, and it's more transactional and very, you can see it and segregate it. And then there is a significant amount of funding for uncompensated care and indigent care. And so I really want to just ask about that piece, because you mentioned 225 FTE, but I'm assuming when you gave that number was for the first half, the first bucket I described. Is that correct? It's for the fee-for-service transactional piece, yes?
Correct.
But in fact, remind me again the amount of the total payment for indigent care for 2021 that's in the operating agreement, since we didn't have the slides.
27.7.
So 27.7. So explain to me a little bit how that money flows into the hospital in an accounting way, in terms of like which funds it goes into and how it gets used by the hospital.
Sure. Medically indigent payment or patient care services is received monthly to Denver Health. It goes in our core operating budget, and then we use that money to help offset our underinsured care.
So your core operating budget, again, pardon my oversimplifications, but would you say that that might be like equivalent or comparable to our general fund? You pay for other things out of that fund. Yeah, like give me some examples. Well, I guess question one, would it be a fair analogy to call it similar to our general fund? It funds operations for the hospital in a broad range of things. It's not an exclusive fund just for indigent care. Is that accurate?
Correct. That's correct.
Okay, and so other things so what's the size of that total operating fund?
About $1.2 billion.
$1.2 billion. And so is it fair to say that most of the staffing and operations of the hospital come out of that fund, and you don't necessarily segregate these dollars from others? Is that correct?
Correct.
So, some of the questions that we have raised in prior meetings with Denver Health have been about the First Amendment rights of association and engagement of the workers who have decided to form a union. We've kind of talked past each other. You guys talk about employee engagement, and we talk about a First Amendment right to associate. They're not the same thing. So I just want to be really clear. I'm not asking you a question about employee engagement, and I don't want an answer about employee engagement. They're really different things. But I wanted to ask about costs that the hospital may be spending on consultants or meetings, trainings, in terms of consultants who may be advising on, how to talk to employees about this. So frankly, to fight the union, it is very common for employers to hire such consultants. So I'm curious whether or not Denver Health is expending resources on such services related particularly to union organizing.
So I can start, and if you want to add. So, Councilwoman Kenita, it's hard to separate the two, because I would say to you that employee relations is an effect, or they're interrelated. If you don't do something well, which I think we've acknowledged in Robin's emails and otherwise, that we were not serving our employees well. We heard that. We heard that wake-up call. The training that people got was around how to have better relationships with the employees, which is something we're choosing to do. Our choice is to have that direct relationship with our employees. So I understand your question. I'm not trying to dance around it. I'm just trying to say I do believe they are interrelated, that it is an employee relations issue that led to the dissatisfaction, frankly, and we acknowledge that. And we have opportunity to grow and be better as an employer.
So I guess I hear you on that, but in terms of the operating budget, I guess the question I have to you is how we can ensure that none of the city dollars that we are providing in this contract are funding the discouragement, intimidation, retaliation, or other types of concerning resistance to the union activity that workers have reported. So to the extent that this payment goes into an operating budget, if that operating budget is paying for any consulting
Yes,
or
thank you,
legal
Sandoval.
services
That was
that
cool.
have resulted in memos that workers have
If
found
only they would ask about
intimidating or
busting the police
discouraging of their
union.
activities. That's the question I'm trying to get to is, so if you have a survey about how do you like your job and, what would you like better? I'm not concerned about that, but I am concerned about legal and consulting that have specifically resulted in communications from management and or others to workers specifically about their union activity. And so what I want is an assurance about how our dollars in this contract are not used. And it's, I guess because they're in an operating budget with many other dollars, that's what I'm trying to ask about here.
Okay. Yeah, so to be more transparent in my answer to you, absolutely. Of the $27.7 million, none of that is used for what you are asking about. So
how is it that you know that if it's in a $1.2 billion operating budget? If the dollars are not segregated, how is it? I guess, if you have an itemization of the things you've spent funding on, consultants or legal or communications related to this particular topic, where are those things funded out of? Which budget line item? Are they funded out of this operating budget?
No, they would not be, and I'm sorry I'm not being clear. So the line item budget of the operating agreement of that 27.7, that is not paying for this. It would come out of the balance, if you will, of that other X percent of, let's say 95% of this other bucket of money is dealing with our employee relations in a general sense. It's not line items to this 27.7.
So it sounds like, but once it's in an operating budget, it's no longer a line item. You don't line item out the 27 million. You don't say that, 1 million is for Band-Aids and 5 million is for nurses and, 8 million is for oxygen. I don't understand that that's how it works. I understand that it is a lump sum payment and it goes into an operating budget. And so I think that the fact that you spend more, we may never find a perfect resolution. I've raised the question and I hear you that you're saying it doesn't go for this, but it's in the same bucket of funding. And so that is troublesome, I think, to some workers and to maybe some council members. So I will defer to my colleagues, but thank you for doing your best to answer. I appreciate it.
Brad, do you have anything you want to add?
In the slide deck, I know that we went through this 2 weeks ago. You can see our estimate for 2020 and our estimate for 2021 when you look at indigent care, that there's over $100 million in discounts that we provide. So basically what the cost of the care is for our medically indigent patients, and the $27.7 million is definitely eaten up in that cost before those funds are expended elsewhere.
Well, let me just ask a follow-up question, if I may, Mr. Chair. I was going to defer, but they added a little bit. So can I clarify?
Go right ahead.
So, you have a $1.2 billion operating budget. You're saying you spend more than this on indigent care. What specific source is funding consultants and legal related to this topic? Since you're saying it's not this one, then you must know what source is paying for it then?
Yes.
Is it Medicaid billing?
Where's everybody at? This is
Another
fire.
source?
Well, I mean, when you think of those kinds of functions, they're what are considered overhead expenses, right? Because they cross over a variety of departments. And so within that, it's funded from that 1.2. And I get what you're saying is, how do we get down to the exact line item of X percent and making sure that no percentage of that, of this 27.7 is funded for that? I lean into, what the first response, it's really hard to get to that level of detail, but given that 95% of that budget is more broadly spread against, and I think what Brad was trying to say is a large portion of that funding is taken up by the services we don't get reimbursed for. So
let me just, okay.
Yeah. I think you're right.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank. Let's see. I've got 3 members in the queue. I'd like to keep this at another 22 minutes. So I've got.
Don't you dare tell Candy to raise her hand.
Sawyer and Councilman Flynn. Councilman Sandoval, do you mind if I go over to Sawyer and Flynn first? It's good, Councilwoman Sawyer.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Robin. I had a quick question as well about the finances. So when I was so there's a portion of the finances, right, that are direct, that are related to this contract, correct? That's the 27 million that we're talking about. And then there's also under, GAAP, under generally accepted accounting
Seriously,
principles,
if they would grill the police
portion
department
of
like this,
your
everybody would come to city council all the goddamn
operating
time.
expenses that are assigned to this contract, right? Called indirect costs. Is that correct?
Indirect costs.
Right.
Indirect costs.
Right.
What is, good question. Good
What are
question.
indirect costs?
What are they?
So that would include finance, HR, environmental services, IT, marketing, things like that.
Legal.
Okay, and so those aren't necessarily those are operations of the hospital that you use no matter what, right? But they under sort of accounting principles, because you're using a portion of them for this contract, you assign a portion of those costs to this contract as well. It's like an accounting thing. Am I understanding it correctly?
No, there's no indirect costs that are allocated to this contract.
Correct.
There aren't, because you sent me a spreadsheet that the other day.
No, get him, Amanda.
Indicates indirect expenses that are assigned to this contract.
So that would be what the indirect expense allocation would be if we allocated expenses to these services that are provided.
Okay,
That's if we did.
I'm very confused because the document you sent me clearly indicates that you do take indirect expenses against this contract, and then now you're telling me that you don't. Which is it?
Sawyer, let's just go back to the question that you asked for the metric. So when we did your briefing, you asked for a metric that showed where Denver Health takes a loss from the contract. So the metric that you're referencing is the direct cost. That's what we put into the operating agreement that we charge the city for.
Right.
The indirect cost is what Denver Health loses, where our losses are, because we don't put those charges into the operating agreement cost.
Right. So the operating agreement does not have any indirect expense allocated to it. The spreadsheet that I sent you would be what indirect expenses would be allocated if we did so. And then to Stephanie's point, the $7 million that we lose because we cannot allocate the operating agreement cost to Denver Health.
Okay, I guess I'm a little bit confused because it says right here on the sheet you sent me, and I'm quoting, indirect expenses that are associated with the operations of the organization and include human resources, finance, IT, housekeeping, etc. The allocation of these expenses is in accordance with CMS regulations. And then the number I'm looking at says grand total all city services, indirect expenses, 8,154,077. So based on the spreadsheet you sent me, it appears as though what you're saying now and what you sent me are two different things.
Yeah, they're not different. One is just showing what the indirect expense would be if we applied indirect costs to the operating agreement, and we do not.
And so to the right of that sheet is portraying that if we did, it would, that's showing what we're losing by not doing it. Is that helping at all?
Yeah, no, that's
Yeah,
not what
no.
that's not what
Yeah,
the spreadsheet
no.
says. Okay, so just to be very clear, because I want to make sure that that you are not using any sort of accounting principles that would allow indirect expenses that could potentially be used for union busting to be applied to this contract as well. I want to make sure that that is very clear and that that is not happening. So you are not taking any sort of accounting for other operations, HR, finance, et cetera, IT, and applying it to this contract that would potentially also then be used for union busting activities, because it's not just direct costs, it's indirect costs that the hospital could potentially be using for these concerning activities that we don't approve of and don't want to be associated with.
That's accurate. We are not using any of that for those purposes, correct?
Perfect. Thanks so much. No more questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilman Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This isn't exactly covered in the operating agreement, but it's something that's very frustrating to me. And I want to encourage Denver Health to work with the Denver Employee Retirement Plan and with our Department of Finance to settle on the unfunded liability to the retirement fund. As each year goes by, it's more frustrating, Mr. Chair, that there are fewer and fewer DERP covered employees who work for Denver Health. And I think the charts indicate that within the next, over the next 20 years, they will be down to zero. There's a large unfunded liability, and I want to make sure that before we consider this again and another year goes by, that we develop an agreement that Denver Health will contribute to that unfunded liability, so that we don't have five-figured employees who are working on our trash trucks, who are inspecting properties, or who are doing other
Five-figured employees,
subsidizing the retirements of high three-figured doctors and other executives at Denver Health when they
three-figured.
And I would like Denver Health to indicate their willingness to work with DERP and Department of Finance to come to an agreement. I know that there was one back in, I think, 2004.
Whose butt you kissing
or
right
6,
now, Flynn? You're not making a whole
around
lot
that
of
time
sense.
frame. before there was a large unfunded liability. But
This
now
is
there
not 1983,
And
y'all.
as each year goes by, your DERP employees at Denver Health are contributing less and less as a whole as they retire. And so, can you talk about whether about what your willingness is to come to such an agreement?
I think that at this point, this is under legal counsel at this point, and I think it's being reviewed with our legal teams, and I would defer that to Dr. Wittenstein's conversation with you. Mm-hmm. I'm not prepared to comment on that today.
Okay, it's very important to me, though. So thank you.
I hear you, for sure. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman. Council Pro Tem Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question might actually be for DDPHE. And the 911 center, did DDPHE or is it the 911 kind of purview to create protocols for employees that come in and out of kind of the main center?
Hi, I'm Megan Prizo, Contracting Manager for the operating agreement. And DDPHE would not create those protocols. I believe Laura Wachter in Department of Safety is on as not as a panelist, so she might need to raise her hand to be given permission to speak on behalf of that, but I think she can potentially better address that than we can. We did not create those protocols.
Okay, and if it's not part of the operating agreement, I could follow up later. I see Laura coming in. But my question surrounds kind of what process is set up there, given we have a number of different pools of employees that operate out of one large kind of shared space down there, including Denver Health EMS. So just want to understand kind of how that space is managed. I didn't notice specifically 911 facility kind of protocol, and maybe that's not the place for in the operating agreement, but there is kind of general reference to comply with local laws, which I'm assuming kind of a public health order falls under. But I just want to better understand kind of what's changed at the 911 call center, and kind of the compliance that we hold any party to, whether it's a city employee, a firefighter, EMS, whoever's going into that building.
Yeah, good morning. Laura Wachter, Deputy Director of Safety. And Councilwoman Torres, I'm sorry I stepped away for a brief moment, but I'm assuming you're talking about the COVID protocols?
Correct.
Perfect, thank you. So right now, 911 Center does follow the city COVID protocols if an employee is feeling sick. And additionally, we have opened up our backup center, and we have moved about 30% of our employees to the backup center. So we are maintaining the socially distant criteria. So
and at the backup center, is it a blend of Denver Health and city, or is it all city?
Currently, the backup center is about 30% of our call takers and dispatchers. Currently, the paramedic, the EMS dispatchers, as well as the firefighter dispatchers, because of the way their staffing is, they are still currently
at the main center
at Peoria, and that is because of their staffing levels. So they are also maintaining, to the best of their ability, to be socially distant.
Thank you.
As well as the mask requirements and other city protocols.
Okay. Thank you for that, Laura. Is there any
sorry, I'm bullying city council
so new to kind of the way that we arrange workplaces and our interaction? Was there any need to put anything in the operating agreement? I know it's not kind of an additional fee for service or something else we're paying for, but just employee practices, whether it's reporting if you feel sick, or kind of testing requirements, anything like that, come into play in this area?
Yeah, and I don't feel that there's a need to put it in the operating agreement, as we do follow all of the city protocols and those are established through through DDPHE. So
that's fine.
Okay, I'll follow up with them after. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
You can turn that off too. if you want to.
Councilwoman Sandoval, you're back up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to formally ask, I see our council president on the call, if we could have a courtesy public hearing when on the final vote for the operating agreement. I think that final vote would be November 23rd. So I'm just would like to put that on the record right now that I would like to ask for a courtesy public hearing.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Thank you,
Not
Councilwoman.
seeing any further hands up. I will just add my comment that I appreciate my colleagues doing their best to pin down whether this agreement puts forth any funds to be used in any union busting type of activities. But I would just add that I don't care where the money's coming from. I would expect Denver Health to honor the rights of our workers to organize, as is their right.
Wow,
so with
Cashman.
that, I thank the team from DDPHE and Denver Health for their presentation. And we will look forward to seeing you at council in the near future. And with that, we will transition. Well, actually, we have, this is an action item. So I need to ask if there's a motion to move 1138 to the full council.
So moved.
Pro Tem Torres, do I have a second?
Second.
I will let Emily Lepel determine who that second was. And is there anyone opposed to moving this forward? Hearing no opposition, we will in fact see you at council. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Next up, we have a briefing from host on the TRUA program, Temporary Rental and Utility Assistance. And I'm going to ask Melissa Toddy to
Yeah, seriously, yay, Cashman.
well, before we get into that,
You disappointed me the other night,
Councilwoman
Cashman, but you
Gilmore,
kind
did
of almost
have
came
your
back here,
hand up?
kind of almost, sort of. No, not
Did
really.
I
But
cut you off?
be nice,
No,
Candy.
you didn't.
I'm
I
watching
just
you.
wanted to acknowledge Councilwoman Sandoval's request, and that we can certainly accommodate that at the council meeting on the 23rd. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Sandoval.
Thank you. I apologize. I hit the
Gilmore.
participants button too quickly. Thank you all. And before we continue with Ms. Toddy, I want to welcome Councilwoman Sedabaka to the table as well.
Candy.
Melissa, go ahead.
Good morning, everyone.
Candy's
I'm
here.
going to go ahead and share my screen.
And Melissa, if you could try to do these in like 20 minutes, that would be spectacular.
All right, we will do our best. Lots of info in here.
Yes, ma'am.
Can everyone see the presentation okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. Department of Housing Stability. And, just want to also thank you all for your leadership on 2B as well, as you mentioned at the beginning of this call. Today, we are going to be giving a equity briefing on our temporary rental and utility assistance program. We'll be going over some contract amendments and request some action items from you today. So to start, to go through our TRUA equity briefing, we looked at data from January through September of this year. I want to first, thank Catherine O'Connor, who was our data analyst and will be presenting on some of these slides. But the amount of work that went into creating a dashboard to gather this data and analyze it was substantial. And so just really want to thank her for her time and efforts in helping us to put together this briefing. What we found in analyzing that data is that TRUA resources serve more people of color than what we see in the general population. We will be going into detail for each of these points that we're presenting here. That we are serving primarily households at or below 30% of the area median income. We're serving more renter households with 3 or more people compared to Denver's renter households overall. We're serving residents across the city, many living in areas vulnerable to involuntary displacement. And then we have seen a decrease in the number of applications being denied. This is likely due to the recent application and programmatic changes that we'll talk about today as well. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Catherine O'Connor to present the next few slides. Okay, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Melissa. Right, so like Melissa said, this data took a lot of processing time, and since we submitted these slides, I have cleaned up some of the visuals and done a little bit more research. So just want to offer that if anyone's interested in digging into the data a little bit more, I'd be glad to set up a time to meet again separately and kind of go through the dashboard and answer more specific questions with you in real time. But the overview, I will say we didn't put it on the slide, but in 2020 so far, we've served, we've served, I forget how many unduplicated households, but we've served, provided payments to 2,117 households for a total of $3.8 million. So these two charts here show
$3.8
the number
million
of payments by top 25 neighborhoods, and then the top 25 neighborhoods by the amount of funds. These are the same two lists. You will see that one is marked blank, and that is where the addresses that we were provided were not able to be matched to any address that was found in Denver, or even outside of Denver. So unfortunately, we couldn't map those. But that's a 1.5% rate of unmatched addresses, which really isn't bad at all for geocoding. So the list of
So this is the number I want you guys to keep coming back to. It's the number that jumped out at me when Mayor Hancock was talking about the budget, giving his initial presentation, and it was allocating $3.5 million for continued convention center operations as an investment in Denver's main revenue item, which is tourism, aka conventions and sports activities, because he's expecting that to bring us out in 2021. Does that sound responsible to you? I'm saying no. So use that number, which I view as very irresponsible investment, and compare that to every other number you hear. This is how much we value our unhoused neighbors, the impoverished, and those most affected by the global pandemic.
Bar chart is the non-Hispanic white, and the rest of the colors represent the Black, Indigenous, and people of color populations. On the next slide, we'll look at the total number of TRUA payments and amount of funds broken down by race, ethnicity, in comparison to the breakdown by race, ethnicity for Denver as a whole. And as we said, we do see that more TRUA recipients are in the BIPOC population than Denver as a whole, and as expected, the amount of funds accounts for a higher number of recipients in households that are a BIPOC population compared to Denver as a whole. Thank you. In looking at income, as you know, you can only be eligible for TRUA if your household income level is less than 80% area median income. What we're seeing is that most recipients across all neighborhoods are actually in the 0 to 30% area median income level. So
I'm talking about.
In comparison to Denver as a whole,
this is true.
On the next
it
slide,
is. It is.
We pulled Denver renter households and only looked at those that were 80%
well done,
AMI
MF
and below.
Blakely.
So all
That's exactly how we need to look at it.
Eligible.
Well done.
And you can see there's a much higher proportion of TRUA households that are less than 30% AMI than we see in renter households across Denver. And last, we looked at household size. So I apologize in advance. This is a little confusing with the legend. We have very detailed data that we collect by each household for number of people in the household. Some even have 12. There were 2 that reported as 0 that I could not correct without messing up the data, so I had to leave those. But the majority are households of size 1 through 3. And if we go to the next slide, we can look at how that compares to Denver as a whole. For Denver as a whole, renter households, we only had information about household size broken down as household size of 1, 2, 3, or 4 or more. But when we look at that in comparison to the TRUA recipients, we see that TRUA recipients, the representation is larger households overall than compared to Denver as a whole. And in addition, what we see is that the smaller households received a higher number of payments, but less funds overall. And larger households actually received fewer number of payments, but a larger amount of funds overall. So that kind of makes sense in terms of if you think about rent and housing unit size and what a larger household would need. So I'm going to pass it on over to Melissa, but like I said, if there are questions or if you guys would like to dig into this data more in an interactive way and walk through the dashboard with me, I'd be more than happy to do that. Thanks so much, Catherine. So this slide, the map itself is pulled from the neighborhood dashboard, which is on Community Planning and Development's website, and shows neighborhoods vulnerable to involuntary displacement through the categories of least, less vulnerable, or most vulnerable. And it's a bit of a longer list pulled from Catherine's dashboard. So this is 33 of the neighborhoods.
I mean, that's
payments,
ridiculous.
And as you'll see, many of them fall in areas that are vulnerable to involuntary displacement. However, it also identifies areas where we have room for improvement. And so I will talk about how we are addressing that in a future slide.
Gosh.
Additionally, wanted to provide information on applications received versus denied, as this is a question asked of us. This is pulled from our Salesforce reports. And so what you'll see is that this is complete applications received. This is what we've been asking for from our nonprofits over the last couple of years. And so these numbers are lower than maybe what you've seen sent to you previously, which were pulled from databases of everything that's come in the door.
Oh my God, look at that increase from January to September.
It is a substantial increase. You can see the very high numbers in complete applications that are being received. What we're also seeing is that the percent denied is decreasing. This is likely due to us making those programmatic changes to reduce barriers over the previous months, revising the application, which went into effect September 1st. And so through all of those efforts, we are seeing kind of fewer households being denied through this process. Additionally, we don't formally track processing times currently, but through anecdotal information from the nonprofits, we're expecting kind of an average of 2 weeks in terms of processing times. The maximum being, when COVID first hit and we were not staffed to handle the increased volume, but have since hired additional staff to help process those applications. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and continue into the second portion of this, which is to go over the contract amendments, because some of those questions hopefully can be answered through these slides as well. And then hopefully have plenty of time for Q&A at the end.
Great.
So I did want to just provide an opportunity for us to pause and remember that we are going through a lot of data and information, but at the end of the day, these are individuals and families who we are serving, each with their own stories, each with their own hardships, and very grateful to those who take the time to send letters and emails to the nonprofits. These are just some of the few clips from the many letters that our nonprofits have received this year. And I think it's just really important for us to remember that these are our neighbors that we are serving. that this has been an incredibly difficult year for so many folks, and just want to thank you for your support to date in providing this really valuable resource to our residents. I also, on a less maybe positive note, a couple of recent reports have
only
come
1 in
out,
6 renters are not caught
center
up on
on
rent.
budget and policy priorities. Recently released a report finding that nearly 1 in 6 renters are not caught up on rent nationally. That is higher for residents of color. Also in September, the National Council of State Housing Agencies found that Colorado is projected to see as much as 469 to 666 million in unpaid rent and 140,000 eviction filings by January 2021. And so this is at the state level. Something that I think we are all preparing for is to see what will happen when the CDC eviction moratorium ends, and are grateful for Governor Polis and his state level moratorium that's currently enacted. So some of the revisions that we've made to the application and the program since we last spoke to you. The revised application went into effect, as I mentioned, September 1st. We have removed the requirement for residents to pay a portion. It actually happened previously when the contract amendments happened in June, July. We also moved to a self-attestation for hardship. Previously, we were asking for documentation. That was a big barrier identified by our community navigators and others. And so aligning with the State Division of Housing and their program, moving to self-attestation. We're also now utilizing income qualification by leveraging documentation based on whether or not folks have received other benefits that have already income qualified them for those benefits.
That's really important
so
right
it's
there.
Easier to provide us documentation.
If you've ever tried to apply for benefits, you have no idea how hard it is.
Verified,
None.
rather than going and gathering pay stubs, which may be more.
This is part of the reason why it's so difficult to get
we are able to utilize that to income
subsidies and whatnot for the unhoused.
We also created clear checklists for required documents and what constitutes a complete application. We've translated it into several languages requested by our community navigators. And we'll continue to add to this list while always offering additional translation and interpretation services. And then we are continuing to collect ongoing feedback and changes. I wanted to also highlight some of the ongoing work that we're doing that is focused on addressing equity. We are more formalizing the partnerships between our community navigators and TRUA administrators. We have provided some trainings on submitting a complete application, doing ongoing monthly meetings, and then also want to thank the Neighborhood Equity Stabilization Team, who has provided some funding for community navigation. I believe we may have some partners on from East Colfax Community Collective, the GES Coalition, as well as the Neighborhood Equity Stabilization Team, if you have any questions specifically for them. Additionally, we are working on an equity plan strategy in partnership with our Office of Social Equity and Innovation and UC Berkeley. Definitely want to thank Kim Desmond and Aaron Brown and their team. I believe Kim is on with us today as well as Jessica and Dr. Linos from UC Berkeley. But their work and support for this equity plan strategy has been tremendous. So what we're looking to do is target mailers for TRUA to residents living in neighborhoods vulnerable to eviction and involuntary displacement. To identify those neighborhoods, we looked at data from the Eviction Lab, the Urban Institute, the Denver Neighborhood Equity Index, and other sources, so that we can really start to target where we are mailing flyers. We're also going to be testing different messaging to identify what increases uptake from folks who may have not applied for rental assistance before, but who may need it. And then also evaluating short and longer term outcomes. So we're currently in conversations with the Denver court about eviction data, and also talking about potential surveys to residents and recipients of TRUA assistance. And then, of course, we are doing ongoing work with OSEI on our equity plan, looking at strategies and data collection across our programs, policies, and investments. So I know Catherine mentioned the number of payments that have been provided to date or through September. It is 1,796 unduplicated households from January through September. Use this as an opportunity to thank our nonprofit partners, Brothers Redevelopment, Northeast Denver Housing Center, and Del Norte. It's tremendous to see that we, are on track to most likely more than double the number of households served. They're working tirelessly all of the time.
I'm glad we're serving more, but I hate that we have so many more in need
today as well.
And we're more excited about holding Denver Health's feet to the fire
also the
than we are
average number months of assistance.
Mayor Hancock's and DPD's, to be honest with you.
We have
That's where I'm at.
An increase in those. I believe on the FinGov meeting said we saw an average of 4 months. That's actually months when I dug into the data a little bit more, but is likely to increase if I had to guess in coming months. And the average amount of assistance likely increasing because we did remove the requirement for residents to pay a portion. We're also seeing folks who maybe wouldn't have previously needed to apply for rental assistance and were previously higher income now applying for rental assistance. For the specific contract amendments in which we're asking for action on today, this is the locally funded, more or less, contract for Brothers Redevelopment. We're adding $250,000 to an existing $2 million contract. This contract spans starting in January 2019. We're also looking to amend it to extend into March of next year, again in preparation for the CDC eviction moratorium ending and not wanting to have a gap in services as we have not yet released our letters regarding our 2021 NOFA awards.
This is so true and well said.
We know, again, the program serves up to 6 months of rental assistance and 2 occurrences of utility assistance. It is currently paying the full amount due and serves residents at or below 80% of the area median income. We anticipate this contract will serve approximately 985 unduplicated households. Again, that's including 2019 and 2020. Going into 2021 now.
Let's see here.
Next is Northeast Denver Housing Center with the same funding source. As I believe many or all of you know, Northeast Denver Housing Center is currently out of both local and federal funds. So we are now directing residents to other resources while we go through this contract amendment process. This would add $750,000 to their existing $2.3 million contract for a new total of $3,050. Same qualifications, and we expect that this would serve approximately
so here's another issue I have. That's a moving target. Below 80% of the area median income.
This is a federal coronavirus relief
doesn't mean you're getting paid more or you're better off, but if the people around you are and you're being left behind, you can be squeezed out of assistance. Not okay. That needs to change, but I'm pretty sure that's part of our city charter.
Will serve approximately 720 unduplicated households. The reason for the lower number here is, the locally funded contracts previously had residents paying a portion, and therefore we were able to serve more households. Whereas here, if we're paying 100% of the amount due, and likely for more months, there's just a shift in how many unduplicated households we anticipate being able to serve with this amount of funds. Also, I'll mention that these are specific to COVID-related hardships. So folks who may have hardships unrelated to COVID would be referred using the local funds, and these would be specific to folks who have a COVID related hardship. Again, it's a self-attestation. This one is unique, never come through with a request to decrease a contract, but this is for our coronavirus temporary mortgage assistance program. Again, these funds have to be spent by December 30th, and we just have not seen the amount of need or outreach for this program as we anticipated. So we are actually decreasing this contract from $1 million to $200,000. 500 of the $800,000 will be moved to TRUA to help support the increased need we have seen there. The remaining 300, we are in conversation with Department of Finance of where those funds can be best utilized. We will obviously continue to do outreach. We've done social media and websites and flyers, and referred to our housing counseling agencies. We'll continue to do advertising and marketing to try to get the word out. We've also, in conversations with the State Division of Housing, seen that this is similar to what they're seeing, just many residents able to get forbearance from their servicers and lenders. And we see that data through our 311 and 211 call centers as well. Just many folks coming in for rental utility assistance, not so many for mortgage assistance. This program does provide up to 3 months of mortgage assistance. It is for residents at or below 80% of the area median income, with a new total.
Trump just picked up Maine's 2nd Congressional District and their single electoral college vote.
And we have served about 26 through September. Last but not least, this contract will come forward via consent. We're working on the budget now, but this will add $300,000 in coronavirus relief funds to a $2 million contract for a new total of $2.3 million. We expect it will serve approximately 500 unduplicated houses. And the one other item to mention is that we are requesting your support for moving forward the 4 resolutions.
Democrats
here,
flipped Michigan Supreme Court. Daniel's back by gaining a seat there, which is huge. Democrats also gained a seat on the Ohio Supreme Court, but they needed to gain 2 to flip the chamber. They just narrowed the advantage. So in 2018, it was 7-0, all Republican. Now it's 4-3. That's a big deal. That's a really big deal.
Denver Housing Center contracts would go to first reading next Monday. And with that, I will open it up for questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation, Melissa. I've got several council members in the queue. Before I get to that, part of the reason for this presentation was requests from the community for information on the TRUA program, and I see Nola Miguel in the queue. I wonder, Nola, if you could take a minute or two and just give your perspective that this is where, if we're getting at the information that is helpful to the community. Do we have Ms. Miguel promoted? I see you there. You're muted.
Nola has been promoted.
Okay. Are you there? Still muted. Give you another minute, Nola, and then we'll try to get back to you. Okay, I'm going to start off with Councilwoman Sawyer.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chair. I actually was wondering if you could promote Jesus Gonzalez, who is from the East Colfax Community Collective, who I believe is also in attendance. I'm not sure. Jesus, if you're here, can you raise your hand, please? Yeah, he's one of the attendees under NOLA as well. Thanks, Jesus. And I believe he just has some comments about the community navigation piece. Melissa, thanks so much for all of this information. It was hugely helpful and hopefully has provided some information. Jesus, are you in?
And I'll just remind everybody, we've got about 24 minutes and 4 people in the queue. Jesus, are you with us? I hope we're not having
No, technical difficulties.
technological.
If you're there, you need to unmute.
Well, I'll tell you what, I see Miss Miguel has appeared. If you don't, I'm going to go to Nola.
Perfect.
And then go to Jesus. Nola, go ahead.
Hi, sorry about that, some technical difficulties. Thanks so much for allowing us to speak. I'm from the Gloville Elyria Swansea Coalition, Organizing for Health and Housing Justice. And yes, we have been doing some navigation thanks to those funds from NEST, and have been, trying to support neighbors in GES around getting access to TRUA in particular during the COVID crisis. I would say and I just want to say thank you to host and thank you to the TRUA providers for having this and keeping at it and keeping with us. And we have been in a lot of conversation and modifications. What I'm not seeing yet is a real clear analysis of the data on the equity terms that are related to access. And I mean, I think that's just looking more at the data of who is being denied. And also just, I saw a slide about equity plan, but I still don't know what that plan is. So I'm wondering, Gloville isn't even on the list. Elyria Swansea was like the bottom on that list. We know that our neighborhood among the other NEST neighborhoods are facing displacement right now. And we're seeing a recent uptick in applications. I would say in the last couple of months, more applications have been approved, and we have created a better relationship in communication. But we clearly see the need for navigation. It's taking folks, especially language barriers, technology barriers, issues with landlords, all those things mean it just takes more time to get folks through. And so what we would be looking for in an equity plan would be more of a more analysis of the data to start with, and then actually looking at dedicated funding that would be reserved for those NEST neighborhoods that we know need that extra navigation and are disproportionately impacted by all that's happening with COVID. So those are my comments, and I hope Jesus maybe go next.
Sure. Well, let me ask Melissa and Catherine if you care to respond to that at all.
No, I mean, I think Nola's right. There's some data that we just don't have in order to analyze it. And so it's something that we're looking at improving on what's being collected. The equity plan is something, I know we have Kim Desmond on, but every department is working on a plan. It's very early in the process, so continuing to collect the feedback from our community navigators and others on what should be included in that plan as well, larger than just TRUA, but across host programs, policies, and investments. And so, I think we are still trying to understand whether having dedicated sources for certain neighborhoods is legal under the Fair Housing Act. Our partners have identified that as a fair housing concern. And so what they have promoted and encouraged is targeting outreach to households, which is the path that we're pursuing. But always open, and just really want to thank Nola and her team, as well as Jesus and his team and everyone working to do the hard boots on the ground community navigation work.
Great, thank you very much. I do see Jesus in the lineup here. Jesus, are you still with us?
Yeah, I am. Sorry. I think I had a link that had my name as Nola as well. And that may have led to some confusion. Thank you. And yeah, first of all, obviously I want to reiterate like the thanks that we have from the East Colfax community for Del Norte's hard work, brothers, Northeast Coast, everyone that's involved in this. It's really made a huge difference in helping people stay in their homes and remain part of this vibrant community. And that can never be unsaid, or can always, right? We always need to lift that up. But I wanted to speak a little bit about sort of just how the lack of funding or the exhaustion of funding sort of has played out in the community and is really scary for a lot of folks. We got from the community collective side of things, we got navigation support from Nest. So we were able to hire on and start doing outreach before we had any sort of indication that funding was low. And with just a little bit of outreach, we got so many clients. We've touched base with 75 or so in just a couple of weeks, and we're able to process about half. But now we're in this situation where people are finding out about the TRUA program through us and have hope that they might be able to get rental assistance. But so many of those, over close to 40 or 39 applications, are now on hold, where they're just perpetually stuck. And we're sort of scrambling, right, to direct people to other resources that might be available. We're finding that so many of them are also out of funding, so that has been difficult. So from on the ground, it's created a situation that's quite tricky for us, right, where we're doing the outreach, giving people the information, saying, hey, we can help you with this. But then now having to say, oh, there's no funding, and then our community members are stuck with really like just deep uncertainty about whether they're going to be able to stay in their homes, which we don't like to see, obviously. And what's especially scary is that before the eviction moratorium, we walked into almost literally like an eviction happening. And at the time, the TRUA funding was able to get fast tracked, and we were able to support that family. But as we're seeing more and more evictions, we don't have that same ability to help folks right now. So our concern, right, is the ability to have prioritized funds for neighborhoods like ours, like GS and others that have that really like immense immediate need, as well as maybe like I'm not familiar with all the contracts, but just like if there's money somewhere in the TRUA program, the ability to move it around to the neighborhoods and really ask about like where is that flexibility and how can those funds be moved to where they're needed most. Our navigation program has been successful in increasing outreach, and we hope to see that sort of increased and beefed up in other parts of town and in these types of neighborhoods. And yeah, just to follow or to build on the data question, though, I did want to lift up our concerns about language data, right? I know that it's not in the application. We had sort of talked about including it, but with the rush of things, that sort of fell off. And we're wondering if there's any plan to include that moving forward.
Thank you, Jesus. Comments from host?
Yeah, so we will definitely be looking at adding and tracking kind of the language piece. To Jesus's point, we have had that conversation. And so just looking at the best way to do that and ensure, most importantly, that we have the resources ready to go and deploy in terms of translation, interpretation services on call for our nonprofits as that is needed. So we are in good shape to move forward with that.
Thank you, Melissa. I've got members Gilmore, Torres, Kanich, and Sotobaca in the queue. We're quarter of. Some of us may be flexible with a few minutes after the hour, but we do have 4 action items attached to this that we need to vote on. President Gilmore.
And I got to go at noon. I've got a hard
Thank
stop,
you, Mr.
y'all.
Chair. And thank you, Melissa and Catherine, for your work on this and including the unduplicated numbers in the slide deck and the appendices. I'll just kind of fire out my questions and don't expect an answer. Maybe I can get one as follow-up. But can we get a breakdown by zip code? Slide 28, you've got a really great chart showing all of the neighborhoods that you are tracking throughout the city. And it kind of correlates back to Green Valley Ranch and Gateway and Cap Hill having the most folks applying and securing funds. Those two neighborhoods are also our largest neighborhoods. The disconnect that I'm seeing and that I'm wondering about the navigation, I'm wondering about the digital divide, talking about equity and the language issue that has been brought up. Because when you look at slide 28 and the number of households per neighborhood, Montbello is fourth with 8914, but Montbello is very low on the neighborhoods as far as securing funds. And so right there, that sort of tells me that there is some sort of equity issue possibly going on, because we know that there is a huge digital divide in the Montbello neighborhood. And so advocating for those navigators. But so I would like to request as well, and I don't know if it's from you all or Northeast Denver Housing Center, to get the data broken out. How many folks are looking for rent assistance versus how many are looking for utilities assistance? That would be great information to have as well. And then if we could, on the dashboard, we did go and look for the renter versus utilities data broken out. If it's on the dashboard, please let us know. Otherwise, it'd be great to have this, all of these data points related back to zip code, if possible, because that's how we're tracking this with the contracts and the partners as far as they're measurable. So those are my questions. Thank you for the follow-up, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. I've got Council Pro Tem Torres, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Emily, for promoting Kim Desmond into the conversation. I was encouraged to see the breakout per neighborhood by race and ethnicity, and just wanting to better understand how the Office of Social Equity and Innovation is working with HOST. And then Kim, if you can also speak to Denver Human Services, because I know that they are planning to, I guess it was enter into eviction prevention, some funding space in addition to some of the budget amendments that were made recently. So I know that Kim works heavily with UC Berkeley on really kind of tracking what outcomes can be measured and demonstrated as, and just wondering if that's what's happening with HOST. And then Kim, if it's slightly off topic, so we can also chat about it later, but I am interested in whether or not the same arrangement or relationship is there with Human Services.
Thank you, Councilwoman Torres, for the question. I will tackle the first question, and perhaps we can follow up in regards to the question that you have directly for Human Services, as we would want Don Modest to speak directly around what they're doing around eviction prevention in their shop. And so we can most certainly follow up. I'll connect with Don and team and you to get a follow up to that. And so to your first question, our work with Melissa and Catherine and HOST, and Nola, this goes to your question as well. Cities are working on right now, starting our equity plans, and we will roll that out more in terms of how we're approaching that to get feedback. So Nola can also chat with you as well. And so with HOST, with this project, in terms of our UC Berkeley partner, Dr. Elizabeth Linos, it's really getting to what you just also asked Council President Gilmore around how do we really reach that digital divide? How are we making sure that people get access to the information if they don't always have access to technology? And so that's what this project is really about, is really studying and looking at So I applaud Melissa and Catherine for really digging in with our office to say, we got to make sure we are studying all the zip codes and looking at the disparities and looking at access issues, not just regarding translation, but also regarding digital access. And so this project is tackling both of those things. So Dr. Lino's most certainly, we literally meet weekly to dig into these kind of questions. And our goal is to problem solve and to say, how do we make sure we're serving the folks who need it? And so that's really where we're starting at. So the data conversation, most certainly, Host is getting support from a whole team of analytic folks from UC Berkeley to help them really dig in to say, what are we missing? What are we not seeing here in terms of the data trends? And what are some of the gaps? And so that's what really the project is about. And so Councilwoman Torres, to your question, that's how you measure it. Our goal is to make sure that we're measuring and addressing any inequity and we can quantify it in a way that's causal. And so that's really what we're doing with this project is it's clear, measurable ways to approach any inequities with this rental assistance that we provide through Host.
Okay, thank you so much, Kim. I'll follow up because I'd love to know more about how that's looking overall. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Knight, you're up.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. My first comment is one that probably can only come from an at-large council member. I love my colleagues. You're all great advocates for your districts. I think one of the disconnects in the data is that it's not weighted by the number of rental households in each neighborhood. Elyria-Swansea does have great need, but it's very low density. There are many of the renters are in single family homes. And that is very different than mega complexes in Southeast Denver with 1,000 apartments, right, in one complex. And so I do think that it might be possible that we're penetrating a greater degree of the need in neighborhoods. So you might want to show your results or weight them based on the number of renter households. And I don't know if that's a factor in Montbello as well. There are some large complexes in Montbello, but it also has a lot of single family homes. And I just want to refresh folks that a lot of the nest neighborhoods in the displacement mapping were based on home ownership. They weren't based on rental. And so I will just say that I appreciate the caution on going to set-asides for particular neighborhoods. We do need to think strategically about areas at risk of displacement, but I just want to remind us that not all the areas that are at risk of displacement are Nest neighborhoods. Nest isn't working in Southeast Denver, and we have a lot of mega complexes. Those are the drivers of our evictions are out of Southeast and Southwest Denver. And so we just, equity doesn't always look the same. And I just want to be cautious about saying a transfer of resources to Nest neighborhoods at the expense of a humongous number of very vulnerable renters who are in neighborhoods that aren't part of that focus program right now, but they are just as at risk of becoming homeless or displaced. And so I think it is critical to look at digital divide. It's critical to look at language barriers. And so I want to support my colleagues and the community voices on problem solving in their neighborhoods. But I do want to say that there are some differences based on how many rental units exist in neighborhoods that explain some of the data, right? Capitol Hill has the most apartments of any district in the city. That's why it's at the top. It's, so there are some things that are about, cause and effect that don't necessarily mean that inequity is in play. In fact, it might be equitable that the neighborhoods with the most rental units are seeing the most TRUA funds, right? In a certain way. So I just want to caution us about some of the potential unintended consequences of diverting resources away from neighborhoods that are not in Nest, just because of the enormous need that exists there. I think the other question I have is about state funding for rental assistance. I worry a little bit that Denver residents are underutilizing our share or equitable share of state funding for rental assistance because we have TRUA locally funded. And so are we sending folks to use the state dollars?
Good Lord.
And are we looking at that? I do think that, many of those programs, our residents are eligible. And if we're, only self-financing and not having them use the state dollars, we shouldn't have a backlog of people waiting for TRUA money while there are state dollars that are still available. Are the state dollars running out of money too? Or are they available and we're not tapping into them?
They are available, and that's one of the resources that we're sending to folks to right now, especially with Northeast Denver Housing Center out of funds. I will say they, just like Trua, they are seeing a very high volume. Processing times, may take longer as well there, but they do have funds available. We are directing folks there. I will work with the state to try to get a breakdown of how many are in Denver or not. I haven't seen that data yet, but I will see if we can request that from them.
Because I think honestly, we should be a little bit agnostic. If folks need help with rent and some neighborhoods are being more heavily served from the state program, the Left Behind Worker Fund that Denver has invested in, for example, is doing rental assistance for immigrants, right? And so like if they're getting served there instead of through Trua, I don't think that means the city's failing. I think it means we're utilizing the full range of resources. So just wanted to put that out there. I will just say the last question, and I wasn't sure that I was clear in this. So we always have this trouble where the NOFA decisions are not out and we're looking at a budget and we can't tell the community what's funded in 21. So is the request for navigation? So there is a request pending in the NOFA for these funds for 21. Yes, city funds. Is that accurate? We don't know yet if it was awarded, but it was part of the things that were evaluated in the NOFA for 21. Yes.
So it was one of the categories that folks could apply for. I can't speak to whether applications came in or not, but it was a category.
Okay. So, but the navigation was not because that was funded through NEST. Is that right?
Correct. However, we did have a category in the NOFA that was for innovative programs and services. And so that was a pathway by which that could come in the door.
Okay. The urgency with which I think folks need to know about those awards is high because, anyway, you get the point. People right now can't tell what's continuing next year. And if one piece continues and not the other, then we're going to have a mismatch, because we've now seen how important the navigation is. So please, anything we can do to expedite those announcements would be great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the staff for the progress. Thank you to the community for the work that you've spent helping us improve and drive down that denial rate and help us improve this program. So thank you. I really appreciate the hard work, everyone.
Thank you. Councilwoman Sitibaka, you get the last word.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of comments and questions. Thank you for your comments, Councilwoman Kanich. I do want to highlight, though, that these are conversations where intersectionality becomes really important, because while we may have, the most renters in Capitol Hill, they are at risk at a different level. They are a wider population, a wealthier population, and different types of jobs, and have been in their units for different amounts of time. And so I think with the navigation funds that we have till the end of the year, we do need to be targeting a little bit differently to neighborhoods that have layered issues of oppression and more challenging access to these funds. One of the biggest issues here is that nobody can find the application for Trua online. You have to be able to call during business hours to get triaged to determine if you are even eligible to fill that out. And I don't know about you all, but a lot of my personal housing stuff gets done at 1 o'clock in the morning, midnight, because I don't have time during the day because I'm working or doing other things. And with people who are out of work and trying to pick up gigs and Ubering, and if they are working and just can't make ends meet, we need to have the application available online for people to do. And our office put in work to digitize it, to turn it into a form, to help expedite that process. And I would like to know what the status of putting the application online is for both Trua and mortgage assistance. And if we're not doing it, why are we not doing that?
So it's something that we are actively working on. And so hopefully sooner than later, we'll, at least for Trua, have it online. The mortgage assistance program will be ending in December. Again, we haven't had a huge uptick in that program. And so it will be unlikely that we would create an online application for that program.
And is it possible to get a breakdown slide. We have pretty good slides here by neighborhood, but I'm wondering if there's a slide to show us by neighborhood the denials, so that we can understand.
Okay, sorry guys, it's time for my next meeting. I gotta go.
Perhaps
if you can hop on the Zoom, hop on the Zoom. Keep pressing all the way till the end, okay? We can't miss these votes.
Denials.
Not scheduling noons anymore on Wednesdays. Thanks a lot.
Address.
You're coached, you're loved.
Something we can look at.
Remember, if you're gonna yell in the streets,
if there's an ability
you gotta
to
yell inside and at your reps too.
With everything that we put on